With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Kuf. We left off with the Gemara after rejecting the response of Rav Papa, explaining that our Mishnah that began that Erev Pesachim or Avrei Pesachim Samuch LeMincha, as we explained, that's 30 minutes prior to the time of Mincha Ketana. A person may not eat any food in order to eat matzah with appetite, is following the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi generally does not limit meals, not an Erev Shabbos, not an Erev Yontiv. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yossi, by Erev Pesach, will subscribe to the same opinion as does Rabbi Yehuda, that because of the chiyuva the matzah, as we explained, it's a mitzvah midoraisa, Chazal does not allow anyone to eat a proper meal, to enter Pesach and to eat a matzah with appetite. Now we're going to learn today another machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi regarding hafsaka. Hafsaka means interruption of a meal. Meaning, even when a person began a meal behetera, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, and according to, as we established, that the latter Braisa's version is authoritative, that even every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yontiv, already samuch lemincha, a person may not start a meal, but if a person started the meal prior to that, if a person began a meal, Friday 2 p.m., then nothing wrong was done. What happens if that meal extended all the way up until Shkia? So do we say it's Shkia, you have to stop, which is Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, bench, and then make Kiddush for you to be allowed to eat? Or do we say, since you are already in the middle of a meal, you don't even have to stop, nor you don't even have to make Kiddush? That's another machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. And then we will learn that Shmuel says, as does Rav, some sort of in-between opinion. And obviously they can't argue with Tanoim. We're going to read in the Tosfos, we're going to read in Rashi, exactly how to understand Shmuel. But Shmuel is the one that introduces the concept of Poiris, Mapa, Umekadosh. That if you are already in middle of a meal, you don't have to bench, but yes, you have to make Kiddush, with the detail of you have to cover the challahs and then make Kiddush, and then you continue the meal, as we'll explain when we learn the Gemara. We're going to also learn various reasons. Taka, why do you b'chlal have to cover the challah when you make Kiddush? V'chulei. And on Daf Kuf, Amid Beis, we're going to start the sugya, explaining or trying to understand better the minhag of old, that in every shul, Friday night, Kiddush was made, even though no meal was eaten, and really that will initiate the sugya of Shitas Rav, that Rav does not need for Kiddush to be b'makim su'uda. Shmuel holds that Kiddush has to be made only in the location where you will be consuming a meal, and if you did not consume a meal, then you have to make Kiddush again. Chavre, let us start in Daf Kuf Amid Aleph. We left off 5 lines from the top of the Amid. Again, the Gemara established that Rav Papa's answer was not correct. We refuted his answer. That our Mishnah that's saying something novel, that Erev Pesachim or Arvei Pesachim Samuch LeMincha, what is unique about it? That our Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi generally does not limit eating meals Erev Shabbos, Erev Yontiv, but he will be moide that on Erev Pesach, because of the biblical obligation of eating matzah, and we want to do the mitzvah behidur, hidur mitzvahs, to eat it with appetite, l'teyavain, l'taiva, so therefore you can't have a meal, meaning you can't wash. No, it doesn't fit either, because according to Rav Huna, it comes out that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda don't argue when it comes to Erev Pesach. They both subscribe to the same opinion, and not following the latter version, the latter Braisa, that already Samuch LeMincha, or from the 9th hour from the morning, you may not eat a meal. That what? Listen to the words. Halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Pesach, which holds, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that's more machmir, that you may not start a meal Samuch LeMincha, and halacha ki Rabbi Yossi be'erev Shabbos, that Erev Shabbos and also Erev Yontiv, there are no limits. You can start a meal even later than Samuch LeMincha. Now the words halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, halacha ki Rabbi Yossi implies that they argue in all cases. From that we extrapolate, that infers Michlal de Polik Rabbi Yossi betarvayu, not the way Rav Huna understood, that Rabbi Yossi agrees. There's no argument by Erev Pesach, and fakert our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yossi. So answers the Gemara that this statement that you just quoted Halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Pesach. Halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Shabbos is not the same machlokes that we are referring to up until this point. Up until now, we were speaking about a question whether you may start a meal, whether you can do haschala. Now we're going to go into a whole different argument, which is what happens if you already started the meal. And let's speak about chevra, you started the meal beheter. Like I mentioned, you started the meal prior to samach lemincha. Do you have to stop the meal when it gets dark? That's a whole different argument. And here, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda argue both by Erev Pesach and by Erev Shabbos. And for that we say that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda by Erev Pesach, and we paskin like Rabbi Yossi by Erev Shabbos. Says the Gemara Loi, Halacha Mechlal de Pligi, regarding the other argument of Hafsaka, meal interruption, Ditanya. If you began a meal, and again, it's important to note that we're speaking even in a case where you began the meal behetera. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you may never start a meal samach lemincha, not out of Shabbos, not out of Yontiv, not out of Pesach, but that's only from the 9th hour, or what we would call 3 p.m. If you started the meal prior to that, it's 100% okay. Like, what do you think happens today when there's a bris, or any other su'udas mitzvah on Friday, or a pidyon haben? You started early. Actually, some opinions hold that you can even start it later because it's a su'udas mitzvah. But whatever, you started the meal early. So the din is, says the Braisa, mafsikan l'Shabbos, is you must stop the meal by the entry of Shabbos. Now, Shabbos begins by shkia. B'chlal, it's prohibited to eat. It's prohibited to drink. It says in Shulchan Aruch, ideally not even to drink water from shkia until when you make kiddush. Now, to make kiddush, normally you have to daven. But that's a very important concept. There's a very unfortunate minig that developed. It's a minig, improper minig that people have up as a nash in shul, or in some places where people gather, they call it abein hashmashes. It's mamash asad. You're not allowed to eat, drink after shkia. Oh. So what happens if you are in the meal? Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to be mafsik. You know what mafsik means? You have to bench. And then you daven, then you start a new meal, v'chuli. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. However, Rabbi Yossi oimer ein mafsik, and you need not make any interruption. Now, you need not make any interruption means what? That even though it's shkia, even though it then becomes tzeis, look inside chevra, the first toisvis in the wide line, Rabbi Yossi oimer ein mafsikin v'goimer kol ha'su'uda. You finish the whole meal, u'mevarach birchas hamazoin, and then you bench. And listen to this, guys. Now, do you have to have another Su'udah Shabbos? You began this meal Friday or Erev Yontif. So the din is, no you don't, but you didn't make Kiddush yet. So says Tosfos, after you bench, v'achakach mekadesh, kedemuchach bebraisa delakamen and daf kuf beis, 2 daf from now, that mashma the ein sorach lasi Su'udah l'shem Shabbos. Because to eat sorach mali lahamtan yafsik miyad. Okay. So first of all, Shitas Rabbi Yossi of Ein Mafsikin means that you continue the meal into Shabbos, and that meal will be Su'udah Shabbos, and afterwards you only make Kiddush. Let's continue, let's learn the whole Tosfos. Ayvim Toimar ve'eich yaseh Kiddush b'loi Su'udah. We will, God willing, start today in the bottom of Daf Kuf Amid Beis. Daf Kuf Al of this whole question. This whole machlokes whether you have to be Mekadesh Dafka in a place of a meal, and by the way, we paskin that Ein Kiddush Ela b'makim Su'udah. How can you make Kiddush if you will not be eating a meal afterwards? B'loi Su'udah, haloi ein Kiddush ela b'makam Su'udah's answers Tosfos moededik v'yesh leimar that the kochashiv Kiddush b'makam Su'udah. Kiddush b'makam Su'udah doesn't mean that you have to make Kiddush first. Kiddush b'makam Su'udah means that in the place where you make Kiddush, there is a meal. And even though you won't eat anything after Kiddush, since Kiddush is made in the location and right after the meal, this is Kiddush b'makam Su'udah. How great is this? Kivan shemiyad achar Su'udah oisa Kiddush and v'oisa Su'udah Shabbos, like we just pointed out, kadamach b'toy sefta, diktani b'mil say that Rabbi Yossi umaska shul Shabbos b'rechas hamazon, you added it say. If you're adding it say, Zacharaya, that since you ate a kazayis after it became Shabbos, it's Su'udah Shabbos. So that's Kiddush b'makam Su'udah. And now, final point that Tosfos has to make. Guys, we are making it clear that B'hafsaka, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda argue both by Erev Shabbos and by Erev Pesach. Now, Erev Pesach, aside of Kiddush, we have Dalot Koises. And there is a Seder to the way we drink the Dalot Koises. Right? The first kois is on Kiddush. The second kois bayos is on the mitzvah of Haggadah, on the Magid. Right? The third kois is on Birchas Hamazon. The fourth kois is on Halal. So now think about it. If a person is eating a meal, which means the first kois is going to be the kois of Birchas Hamazon, Frek Toisus, Im Yokasha, Le Rabbi Yosi, Ech Yasu Dalot Koisois, Kiven Shelo Yiskachu Ela Achar Birchas Hamazon, V'Lo Yasu Suda Acheres. So it must be, says Tosfos, that the Seder Taka will be different. The Yesh Shleimer, the Yasu Dalit Koises, Shaloike Seder Horagilin, Lasois, which will be when you began a meal before Pesach, Le Rabbi Yosi, that you don't have to stop the meal, Le Rabbi Yosi, that you continue the meal, and that meal is also counted as the Su'udah of the Seder, the Su'udah of Pesach. That first Kois is going to be Birchas Hamazon Tchila. That will be the first Kois. Then Kois of Kiddush. Calls it V'yira Kois. Then the third Kois, we call it Magid, he calls it Laman Ashtana. And then, it's amazing, how do we begin? We begin by washing for Hamaitzi. But here no one is going to wash for the matzah. But what you will have to eat after the Magid, after the Gal Yisrael, is Marar. Because you're not going to be eating Marar during that meal. Because you're not doing a mitzvah, you're having a su'udah. V'achar kach Marar, and ba'al kois revi halal. Now, maybe you make the Kiddush after the Marar. Maybe you make Kiddush not only not after Magid, but after Magid and Marar. That's l'chayre b'atoy. And then the fourth karpa, B'kitzah, the Seder will be different. But there is a machlokes regarding Hafsaka. B'hashgacha pratos, we are learning this other Tafshin Pei Aleph. We are just a few days before Purim. Everyone is going to be learning this during Purim time. And as we'll see soon, that's the whole question when it comes to the relatively unusual scenario where the Yud Dalid falls out on a Friday. One of the mitzvahs is to have a Su'udah. Exactly when do you have the Su'udah Friday? And if you have it later in the afternoon, what do you do? This is the question. Do you have to stop the meal and make Birchas Hamazon? Yes, says Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rabbi Yosi, not only do you need not to make Birchas Hamazon, you don't have to make Kiddush. You eat until when you want. When you finish the meal, you bench, and then you make Kiddush. Says the Gemara, inside, Umaisa berabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. Imagine, they were both together, Shahaya, Mesubin, they were dining, reclining meanings, they were dining in the city of Akoi, V'kadash Aleim Hayoim, and this is Erev Shabbos, and they began the meal for sure beheted, because even though that Rabbi Yosi does not subscribe to any limitations on Erev Shabbos, but Rabbi Yehuda does, they began the meal early, and they went into Shabbos, and what do you do now? You understand, both Tanoim were there. So Amalei Rashbag le Rabbi Yosi, he gave him kavod. He called him Biribi. Biribi means you are like the greatest one. You great one. To give kavod. I know that you hold, you don't have to bench and you don't have to make Kiddush. You can keep on eating. But Rabbi Yehuda is here. Let us give honor to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yosi did not allow. Amalei, I don't understand. I know that you only want to give him honor. Really, the halacha is like me. Rabbi Yosi nemukai imay. So Amaloi b'chol yem v'yem atam achavev devar rai lefnei Rabbi Yehuda, which is the emes. We normally follow shitas Rabbi Yosi. Va'achshav atam achavev devar Rabbi Yehuda befanai. Understand that if you will bench now in my presence, you know what the Talmidim will think? They won't think you're stopping to give him kavod. They're going to think that you're doing it because the halacha is like him. Because why would you give kavod to Rabbi Yehuda? Why not give kavod to me? I'm here. And then people will wrongfully think that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, which we don't. Hagam, and he quoted from the Megillah, that when Haman fell on the bed of Esther to plead for his life, one of the parts of the Hashgacha Pratis miracles, and when Achashverosh went back into the room, it appeared to him that Haman was trying to seduce Esther in the palace. And that was the last nail in the coffin. That so Achashverosh tells Haman, Hagam lichpesh es hamalke imi babayis. You're trying to conquer the queen in my own house. In front of me, you want to paskin like him? And indeed, Rashbag accepted it. Rashbag never meant to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So he tells him, especially now that the Talmidim saw that Rabbi Yosi objected, if the Rashbag would have done benching, even in his mind only to be machabed Rabbi Yehuda, But now that Rabbi Yossi objected, for sure everyone would have misunderstood that Rashbag is paskening like Rabbi Yehuda. So now he had no option. Now he needed to continue. Amalei, indeed, imkain loy yafsik, loy nafsik. Because Shema Yiru HaTalmidim, that you objected, and I am overruling you, and they will erroneously be koveya halacha l'doiros, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, when the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. You don't have to bench. And according to Rabbi Yossi, it's not only that you don't have to bench, you don't have to stop, you don't have to be Periscope mappa, you don't have to make kiddush, you keep on eating. And indeed, Amru, it was said that dafka during that meal, Loizazu, Misham, Achakavu, Halacha, Kirabi, Yossi, that no interruption needs to be made. So guys, we concluded the sugya. So what do we have? When it comes to Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, can you start the meal Samuch min mincha and later Machlekes, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi? When it comes to Erev Pesach, can you start the meal Samuch lemincha? There's no Machlekes. Everyone holds that you may not. That's our Mishnah. Even Rabbi Yossi is made to Rabbi Yehuda. Then there's a separate machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, both by Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, and by Erev Pesach, whether you have to stop a meal when it's Shkia. You began the meal beheter. Rabbi Yehuda says stop, bench. Rabbi Yossi says keep on eating. Not only do you not have to bench, you don't make kiddush. Eat until when you want. When you bench, you have to immediately make kiddush, as we learned in the Tosfos, for the kiddush to be b'makom seudah. Now, normally when you have a machlokes tanoim, aside of the fact that the Gemara says that we pasken like Rabbi Yossi, if anyone were to argue with this latter statement, the only other option we have now is to pasken like Rabbi Yehuda. And here we have something very unusual. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, and you should know that we are going to follow Shmuel, that ein halacha, loike Rabbi Yehuda, v'loike Rabbi Yossi. And an Amoira is saying, not like one Tana, not like the other Tana. Ella, what do? We are Peiris, Mappa, Umekadish. Literally, we cover with a tablecloth and we make Kiddush. Look inside the Rashi. I'm sorry, guys, I just want to make a clarification. I made a big mistake yesterday. What we have here is Rashi. Rashi wrote it. But just to know, guys, in Chumash, Rashi wrote 3 times a Perush on the Chumash. We have the last one. I forgot whether the first one was very long or very short. But Rashi wrote a Perush that was very long. So they said, oh, you got it too long. Chitas takes too much time. Then he wrote something very bekitzer. And they told him it's too short. And then he wrote the average one, which is the one that we have. And every now and then, you ever saw Rashi Yashan and Alanga Rashi, the first Rashi in Bereshis. Long, that was from the longer version. In the Gemara, here on Arevei Pesachim, Rashi's Perush was very short. And this is Rashi. And his grandson, the Rashbam, elaborates. So that's why we learned the Rashbam, because there are more words. Okay, so let's go inside the Rashbam, 8 lines before the bottom of the Amit. Elapoides Mappa, a middle of 8 lines before the bottom. Elapoides Mappa.
Just to clarify, the difference between Parnas Mappa versus Rabbi Yehuda says you have to remove the table completely, and here he's saying you just cover it? Okay,
I want to get the right words, Danny. Let me read the Rashbam. Removing the table is something that we don't do nowadays. We're going to learn this in the Tosfos and Amud Beisum. Let's use the word benching. Let's just apply the words today. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to bench. And then, of course, it's after Shkia. You got to make Kiddush if you want to eat. You can daven, before you eat, you have to make Kiddush. According to Rabbi Yossi, you don't bench and you don't make Kiddush. It's Shabbos. Since you began the meal before Shabbos, you are allowed to continue. And that meal counts for Su'udah Shabbos. Whenever you decide to finish, you bench. That's Rabbi Yossi. And then you make Kiddush immediately. To have Kiddush b'makom Su'udah. Shmuel is saying Poides Mapu Makadosh. Let's read inside what that means. Look inside the Rashbam, 8 lines before the bottom of the Amit. Ela Poides Mapu la Michael, Kidin Kol Shabbasis Hashana, Sheviu Lechem Ala Shucham Kodim Kiddush, Kedetanya Lekaman, Inami Silik Pesoira. This is very important. So this is what Danny was mentioning. I'll speak about it soon in the Gemara. In the days of old, they did not have tables like we have today. People did not eat on the same relatively large table. They were like, the COVID tables that we have in Aden, the little nothings of a table. That is what everyone used by a meal. And whenever you would begin a meal, actually Friday night, it's not that they had the challah covered. They bechlal did not have the challah on the table. They would only bring the table in after Kiddush. Now, since Shmuel says that you have to make Kiddush in middle of the meal, you don't have to bench, but you have to stop by Shkia to make Kiddush. So either you would remove the table, because Kiddush was generally made when Challah is not even there, or if, like Tosfos is going to point out, nowadays the tables are large, it's very inconvenient to have to schlep tables. So what do we do? Like we do nowadays. You can have the challah on the table, but the challah must be covered during Kiddush. That's the meaning of poiris mapa. So you stop the meal, you cover with a tablecloth, not the food, not the chicken, not the meat, not the minei targima, the bread, the challah, the lechem mishnah, and then you make Kiddush. Now, Rashbam is bothered. Shmuel, do you hold like Rabbi Yossi? Do you hold like Rabbi Yehuda? You can't make up a new opinion. Says the Rashbam, this 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The Sfira Leil Shmuel, the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. And as we just established, that halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. See, an Amoira cannot go against the Tana, but he can be machmir. I paskin like Rabbi Yossi, which you don't have to bench. But I'm going to be machmir. Instead of just to continue to eat, el shebola hachmir alatz make tzas. Shelo yigmer sudasa, and only after you finish and bench make kiddush. Achar kach elo yekadesh tchila, make kiddush and then finish the meal. So holds the Rashbam. Tosfos, the last Tosfos in the Amid, argues with the Rashbam. There were in many cases just cousins, the Baalei Tosfos. And Tosfos says 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid that ubechinam Zajac, that the Rashbam was for no reason he made this doichik that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi, but he's machman. No, Tosfos found in the Yerushalmi Chachamim Tanoim that hold poiris mapo mekadosh. In other words, according to Tosfos, there is a third Tanoic opinion, and Shmuel is siding with that Tanoic opinion. Back inside the Gemara, the Gemara Eini Akasha and Shmuel. Is just covering the breads enough? You understand, guys? You don't bench. You don't bench. You stop the meal, you cover the chalas, and you make Kiddush. Any second to last line in the Amid, Shmuel, this is Shmuel, that Kishem Shemafsikan LeKiddush, just like you interrupt the meal. L'chayda, this is a meal that you began Erev Shabbos, or Erev Yantiv, or Erev Pesach, and you went into Yantiv. So now by Erev Pesach we paskin you have to be mafsik, but let's speak about Erev Shabbos. Just like Shmuel says you have to be mafsik lekiddush daf kuf amid beis, kach mafsikin lahadola. Wow! Look inside the Rashbam. That the same thing if you began, let's say Shalosh Shudis, Friday Shabbos afternoon, as everyone does, Shabbos ad halayla, and now it's after Shabbos. You must interrupt your eating and make Havdalah. Now, before we go on to the question, just to point out, look inside the top Tosfos. This is important. Tosfos says, first of all, Rav holds like Shmuel. Many people, when they say poiris mapa mekadesh, like Rav. Well, the truth is, it's both Rav and Shmuel. The Gemara introduces here Shmuel first. Rav agrees with Shmuel when it comes to Kiddush. However, Rav argues with Shmuel when it comes to Havdalah. See the Tosfos? Dilla Havdalah einoi koiva'as. Meaning that if you began a meal before Shkia, Shabbos afternoon, or Yantav afternoon, ein mafsikin lahavdalah. And indeed, by Havdalah he argues with Shmuel. We paskin like Rav. Many people quote Rav, even though Shmuel was the one that brought here poiris mapo mekadosh, but Shmuel also holds that you have to interrupt to make Havdalah. We don't paskin like that. Okay, so now what's the kasha? Let's just firois the kasha, the top line. What did Shmuel mean when he said mafsikin? Right? Kishem shem mafsikin. Lav, does that not mean what Rabbi Yehuda is saying? Rabbi Yehuda uses the words to be mafsik. And afsaka means l'cha'ira, la'akira shulchan. The Gemara uses the words, Danny, removing the table. What it means is to bench. Because when they would bench, right prior to benching, they would remove the table. So Shmuel is saying that you have to bench. That's the whole machlokes. How can you say that Shmuel says poiris mapa? Poiris mapa means you don't need to bench. You just cover the challah. Answers the Gemara, no, that mafsikin means you stop eating. Why do you stop eating? Because you have to cover the challah and make Kiddush. Now, we'll stop over here.
This is what we hold, like Shmuel?
Yes, so let me say the following.
You don't do that by Havdalah.
No, I just said we paskin like Rab. We just learned the Tosfos. But let me explain by Kiddush, and let me tell you this happens often this year. Purim falls out on Erev Shabbos. Now, indeed, there are various questions when it comes to brachos, as I'll point out, because of which the Alter Rebbe says that a Baal Nefesh should not be poides mapa, and in such a year that Alter Rebbe was not speaking about Purim, he's speaking about in general. There's nothing wrong having the Su'udas Purim in the morning, or even having it early afternoon. B'chlal, it's important to know that a person has to eat roiv of the Su'udah on Purim itself. So people that will be poides mapu mekadesh, don't wash a minute before Shkia. At least have the first course, so you should feel satisfied, so you had the Su'udah on Purim. But listen to what happens. We wash for Purim, and the same thing in our sugya, they washed. Number two, especially on Purim, the whole mitzvah, lepasumei benisa, is on wine, not on mashke. So we already consumed wine, so we made a Boire Priyagafen. So now, this year, Shkia will come, you cover 2 chalas. It's amazing. When you made Hamoitzi by the Sudas HaPurim, you don't need Lecha Mishnah for Purim. You made Hamoitzi, it's better to make it on a Shleima, not on a Perusa. But you made Hamoitzi on 1 Bilkala, let's say. When it's Shkia, not Seis, when it's Shkia, we may not eat, no Friday after Shkia, nothing. We may not drink, and ideally not even water. We cover 2 chalas. We make Kiddush. What's Kiddush? Yom HaShishi. Another, by the way, it's important to make sure that the women lit the candles, especially put them in the middle of a meal. That was the biggest takala that happens, that women forget to light the candles. Okay, women light candles. You cover the challah. You don't bench. We paskin like Shmuel. You don't need akira shulchan, which means you don't need birkas hamaz. Yom HaShishi, machloikis rishonim, whether you make a Boire Priyagafen. That's the machloikis that the Alter Rebbe writes, that a Baal Nefesh should just not do the whole thing. We paskin that you don't make Boire Priyagafen. You go straight into the bracha. You drink the wine. What do you do next? Another question, do you have to make a hamoitzi? We don't make hamoitzi. But we pick up both chalas. It's very strange. We pick up Lecha Mishnah. We don't make a bracha. We break the one to the right. With all of the menhagim, al pi Kabbalah, Friday night, al pi Kabbalah, you put the right challah a little bit under the left challah, and then you break the right challah and you eat it. And then, if you don't daven, which we won't daven over here, another issue, when you bench, you say al anisim, because you ate a kazayas before shkia, and you say it say. We paskin that way only if you did not daven during the meal. One is allowed to daven during the meal. Some shuls will daven, we won't. That's the way we do poides mapu umekadosh.
What about the wine? The wine is before eating
the wine, speak like this. The wine we have to have on Purim. The su'uda on Purim. So let's say by us, we're going to start the meal at 5 o'clock. Within 30 minutes, it's enough time to have a proper course and to make a l'chaim on wine. But for wine, you have to make a bracha b'chlal. The wine is never included in the hamoitzi. Since we have wine on Purim, so we don't make the Boire Priyagafen in middle of Kiddush. Even though this is a machlokas rishonim. That's the way we paskin.
Okay, but is the Kiddush on wine or on the challah?
Kiddush is on wine.
So he made Kiddush, right?
You cover the chalas, in middle of the meal. You don't bench. We paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Let's go with the Rashbam. We don't bench. Cover the chalas, stand up, make Kiddush.
Okay.
Yom HaShishi, Mekadesh HaShabbos, drink the wine, sit down, uncover the chalas, put them together, pick them up, don't wash, don't make hamoitzi, eat the right challah. And negate vaited until you bench, and after benching, Kabbalah Shabbos and Maidav. Okay. Rabba barafuna ikla lebei Reish Galusa. He went to the household of the Reish Galusa, and I saw taka kamei. They brought out taka means a table meaning a table with bread. Before he made Kiddush, in the times of Chazal, like we just mentioned before, since the tables were very little, they would normally only bring in the bread to the room after Kiddush Friday night. Only into the room after Kiddush on Yom Tov. That's really a machlokes and Masechtas Beitza, whether you need Lecha Mishnah or not. But on Shabbos, what happened over here? They brought the bread in prior. So instead of him removing the table of bread, paras mapa v'kidesh, which is mamish what we do today. This is not about beginning a meal. This is about that the challah, if there is challah in the room, the challah must be covered when you make Kiddush. Now, why do you have to cover the challah when you make Kiddush? Or even then, the Bechlal will not bring in the challah in the room. So look inside, and Tanya Nami Hachi, we're going to read the Tosfos in a second, that she'ein mevienes hashulchan elam kein kiddush. Really, you should not even bring the challah into the room until after Kiddush Friday night. But ve'im hevi, if you brought it into the room, then poides mape umekadesh. But poides mape is independent of you beginning a meal. Stam, when you make Kiddush, the challah has to be covered. Look inside the fifth Tosfos. The fifth Tosfos, it's high up. She'ein mevienes hashulchan elam kein kiddush. Says Tosfos, that which it says in Masechta Shabbos, that matzah shulchan aruch malach toiv, that when you come home from shul, the malachim come into your house. If they find the shulchan aruch, then you get a bracha. So what are you telling me, that you don't have even the bread on the table when you make kiddush? You should have it all set up when you come home from shul. Says Tosfos like kasha, that even in those days that they only brought the table into the room after you made kiddush, but the tables were already set in the kitchen. And the malach saw that that's the way they ate. They came home, they only made kiddush. Then they brought the food in. The aruchu b'makom acher. Ach, ein mevin oisel makom seuda ad achar kiddush. And then the same thing is when they finished the meal, before they benched, they did akiras hashulchan. Says Tosfos, these are such important Tosfos in va'achshav. Verstehst those Frenchies? Shulchanoi shalanu sheim gedolim yoysim midai. That they big fancy tables. V'kasha lahaviyam achar kiddush, but they have to schlep it. Shaloi lahafsei kol kach min kiddush l'seuda. Right? The Yidden Nebuch went to Europe. Nayim and Hagim, big tables. So says Tosfos, anu regilim lifreis matzah lekadesh, always lechatchila. No, Pashut, have your table set. And what is b'di'evid in the times where the tables were easy to transport is today lechatchila. Now, why do you have to cover the chalas? V'hatam mefurish b'she'il tois and Parshas Yisroi that kehecha the teisei su'udasa bi'ikara de Shabbata, because kehecha the teisei su'udasa, we want to bring the table after it's Shabbos. In other words, if the table is already there before Shabbos, it's not clear that the table was brought to glorify Shabbos. The table was already set on Friday. If there is no table, first you make Kiddush, then you bring in the table, that's an expression that we're being Machabed Shabbos. Reason number one, interesting. Reason number two, V'yesh mefarish zeicha laman. Shelo yehoyo yored b'shab. Let me finish. Shelo yehoyo yored b'shabbasis v'yomim toivim. And again, guys, this statement is really a machloikes and Masechtas Beitzah. And the man would fall on Friday. And how did it fall? It fell like in a package. V'hoyatal milamayla and umilamata. There was dew on top and the bottom, and the man was in between. So when you are poides mapa, it's a zeicha laman, because the tablecloth, we have a tablecloth on Shabbos, and the Zohar says it should be white. We have a white tablecloth. Then you have another cloth. So it's a zeicha laman. We cover the challah zeicha laman. So the big hash on this is, when did the man fall? Double. It didn't fall on Shabbos. The man fell on Friday. And according to one shita, also on every Erev Yom Tov, double. Which is why we have Lechem Mishnah on Yom Tov also. So if the whole covering the challah is zecher to how the man fell, it doesn't make sense. We're covering the challah Friday night, which is Shabbos. The double man fell on Friday. Answers the Midrash. Listen to the words. That just like the man was unique, that when you consume the man, the body did not produce waste, right? It was nivla be'evarim. A me'ein zeh is connected to all of the food of Shabbos. That the food of Shabbos, it has something of the man in it. It's nivla be'evarim. Lahoyer, people erroneously think, that's probably the source, that the calories of Shabbos don't count. My friends, it counts double. Because if what you eat only goes in, doesn't go out, and we know the emes, it counts double the calories. From this Tosfos. Because the food of Shabbos is doimel laman. Yeah.
The table's not there. Is there no issue of Kiddush b'makom suda?
Very good question. And the answer is that if I made Kiddush, and in the location where I made Kiddush, right after the Kiddush, they brought in a meal, it's fantastic. Fantastic.
But don't we say by benching also, like you should dafka not clear off all the bread from the table because it's supposed to be, benching where you ate. So
I'm going to tell you, Danny, that in the days of Chazal, they made akiras hashulchan before benching. Now that we are not oiker the shulchan, you're right, we leave something on the table. Correct. Let's go weiter. Now, Tanei Chada. In one brayse we learned that Shavin, that everyone agrees, She'ein Maschilin, that one should not begin. Who's everyone? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. And one thing is clear, guys. This is just making a sikum. Like Rav Huna, on Erev Pesach, that's the maskan. On Erev Pesach, even Rabbi Yossi agrees to Rabbi Yehuda that once it is Samach Lemincha and on, that's the Shavin, you don't begin a meal. Tanya Idech learned in another brayse that Shemaschilin, that you begin a meal. Everyone agrees that you begin a meal. So says the Gemara, Bishloi Mohad Tanya Shavin She'ei Maschilin. As we just explained, Rav Huna was correct that Meshkachas Lo Be'erev Pesach. Elyahu Tanya, the second brayse that says that everyone, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agree that what? That Shemaschilin, that you can begin a meal. When can you begin a meal? What, are you going to tell me it's Erev Shabbos? Oh, I get it. Rabbi Yossi holds Erev Shabbos, you can begin a meal. But Rabbi Yehuda doesn't. Hamiflek Pligi, there is a machlokes Tanoim. Says the Gemara, no. That even Rabbi Yehuda only does not allow you to begin a meal. Samach Lemincha, from the 9th hour, 3 p.m. Zmaniyos. But prior to that, like Kasha, kan koidem tisha, kan la'achar tisha. And I just want to add one final nuance coming back to Purim. Even though, as we're saying, that after the 9th hour there's a machlokes whether you can begin a meal, when it comes to a seudas mitzvah, there is no such problem. The reason why the Alter Rebbe says that a Baal Nefesh should not do Poides Mapa is because of their shilos whether you make the hagafen or not. There are bracha questions. And one final just minhag Chabad, that by the Rebbe, not Erev Purim, by us, by the Rabbeim and Lubavitch, every Yom Tiv, at the end of Yom Tiv, we wash. And that includes a Yom Tiv that ends Friday. So if Yom Tiv, let's say, is Thursday, Friday, we will always wash at the end of Yom Tiv. And that meal will go into Shabbos. And in public for many years, by the Rebbe, they were Poides Mapa Mekadesh, to be able to continue to make a l'chaim. Now, if you don't eat or drink anything, you don't have to be Poides Mapa. But if you want to make the little l'chaim on that wine, if you call that wine by the Rebbe, Genelis Langer or whatever that was, so then you would Poides Mapa Mekadesh. Somewheres in the Mems, someone asked in public how to do it. And the Rebbe, with his sensitivity, so this person got ashamed. And there are different questions, like we mentioned. Do you make a gofen? Do you not make a gofen? So from then on, the Rebbe never was Poides Mapa Mekadesh. But based on that, even in Lubavitch, and by the way, when it comes to Purim, some communities have a minhag to dafka wash at the end of the day. Because every year they do that. They have the suud at the end of the day. Taka, not a moment before Shkia, like we explained. But yeah, like a half an hour before Shkia, to have like the Ramosas, to have the Iker Su'uda Bayoim, to make a Hagafen during Purim, only to cover the Chalas, to make Kiddush, we B'Poyel Mamish don't make the Hagafen, then we pick up both Chalas, we do not make a Hamoitzi, we eat the meal, and if we don't daven during the meal, then by benching we say both Alanisim and Ritzei. We'll stop over here, Chavre, to be continued.